If you love those boys, you'll come home right now. That's what the voice on the phone hissed into Graham Hale's ear right in the middle of the biggest investor meeting of his year. His grip tightened until his knuckles went white. 7 months ago, grief buried his wife, and since then, Graham had been surviving on fumes, running his company by day, stumbling through nights with his 3-year-old triplets crying, "When is Mommy coming back?" He'd tried sitter after sitter. None lasted. Then Aisha Brooks showed up, quiet, steady, a black woman with a calm smile, and hands that didn't shake in chaos. In 3 weeks, the house changed. The boys ate, slept, laughed again. Even Graham started breathing like a human being, but Elaine Mercer, his late wife's sister, kept dropping by with too sweet concern and eyes that searched for flaws. That day she called swearing Aisha had left the kids barefoot outside and was snooping in Graham's office. Rage swallowed him whole. He sped home ready to fire Aisha on the spot. The mansion was silent, too silent until he heard it pure, belly-deep giggles from the backyard. Through the glass, he froze. Aisha was soaked, kneeling behind a little inflatable slip and slide, guiding the boys with watchful joy as they squealed and skated through sudsy water. Aisha met his stare without fear. "Someone wants you to think I'm the danger," she said softly. "But you need to see what I found." Minutes later, she placed a brown envelope in his hands, court papers. Elaine was filing for custody. And for the first time in months, Graham's fury found its true target, and his heart found a reason to fight. Graham's fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages, the paper whispering like something alive. Names, dates, accusations. Each sentence hit harder than the last: unfit father, unsafe home, negligent care. He swallowed throat tight and felt the old shame crawl up his spine the nights he'd fed the boys cereal for dinner, the mornings he'd shown up to work with yesterday's grief still on his shirt. Behind him, the backyard kept singing with laughter. The triplets slapped the water and squealed, unaware their whole world was being measured and judged on legal letterhead. Aisha stayed standing, not crowding him, just close enough that her steadiness filled the space. "She came this morning," Aisha said, voice low, "through the service gate, with a copy key." Graham's eyes lifted sharp. Aisha nodded once firm. "I watched her. She didn't go to the boys, not at first. She walked the house like she was shopping for weaknesses. Then she went upstairs." Graham's jaw clenched so hard it ached. He could picture Elaine's smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "I followed," Aisha continued. "She was in your office photographing documents. I waited until she left. Then I saw that envelope on your desk. It wasn't there yesterday." Aisha's gaze didn't flinch. "I opened it because something felt wrong. Because those babies out there deserve protection, not a setup." Graham stared down at the custody petition again, and the rage finally changed shape, less wild, more focused. This wasn't about Aisha being careless. This was about Elaine trying to remove the one thing his wife had left him. He exhaled slow and shaky like he'd been underwater for months. "You didn't have to do this," he whispered. Aisha's voice softened, but her eyes stayed strong. "I know what it feels like to lose a mother," she said. "I wasn't going to let them lose their father, too." Graham didn't sleep that night. Not the panicked, broken kind of sleeplessness he'd gotten used to, but the sharp, deliberate kind that turns a man into motion. After the boys finally drifted off, their damp curls fanned across pillows, he sat alone in his office with one lamp on, and the brown envelope spread open like evidence at a crime scene. He read every line again, slower this time, marking dates, circling claims, writing notes in the margin until his hand cramped. When the rage threatened to boil over, he forced it down into something useful. He started making calls. Not tomorrow now. A trusted attorney, a pediatrician's office for records, the preschool for attendance notes and teacher comments. He pulled photos from his phone. 3 small faces smeared with frosting at a birthday cupcake. 3 toothy grins in matching rain boots. Aisha's hands steady in the background like a guardrail. Proof of a life that was healing. In the morning, he adjusted everything. Meetings moved. Responsibilities delegated. He walked into the kitchen while Aisha packed lunches and said, voice rough but clear, "From now on, I'm not just visiting my own home, I'm living in it again." Aisha didn't smile big. She simply nodded like she'd been waiting for him to arrive. Elaine tried to call. Texts followed sweet at first, then sharp. Graham didn't answer a single one. He forwarded everything to his lawyer and kept his focus where it belonged, 3 little boys who needed consistency more than explanations. Months later, when the judge denied Elaine's petition, Graham stepped outside the courthouse and drew in a breath that felt like the first clean air in a long time. That evening, barefoot in the backyard, he let the triplets tackle him in a laughing pile, while Aisha watched from the porch, quiet, present, unwavering. And Graham understood with painful clarity how close he'd come to destroying the very person who'd helped save them. Spring came quietly, the way healing usually does. No big announcement, just small changes you only notice when you stop bracing for the next hit. Graham started coming home before sunset. Not rushing, not checking his phone every 10 seconds, but walking in like he belonged there. The triplets met him at the door in a tangle of feet and squeals, their hands grabbing his pant legs like anchors. He'd kneel, breathe in the warm, soapy smell of their hair, and let the weight of them press the day out of his chest. One evening, after Aisha tucked them in, Graham sat on the edge of the bed and hummed the lullaby his wife used to sing, soft, unpolished, but steady. The middle boy blinked up at him in the dark. "Daddy, is Mommy still mad? We can't see her." Graham's throat tightened, but he didn't run from it this time. He reached for the boy's small hand thumb, stroking the knuckles like a promise. "No, buddy," he whispered. "Mommy isn't mad. She loved you so much it filled the whole house. And even though we can't see her, we can still talk about her. We can still love her. That never goes away." Across the hall, Aisha paused with a laundry basket balanced on her hip, watching him like she was making sure he stayed upright. Graham met her eyes, no drama, just gratitude so raw it almost hurt. He'd been handed a second chance not by luck, but by someone who chose to stand between his children and a trap. Downstairs, he turned off the lights one by one, the quiet no longer sounding like defeat. It sounded like peace settling in. By the time summer heat rolled back in, the backyard had become their safest place. Sunlight on the grass, the squeak of little feet, the kind of ordinary sounds Graham once thought he'd never hear again. He watched the triplets chase bubbles across the lawn, their laughter rising and falling like music, and he felt something unfamiliar settle in his ribs, a steady kind of hope. Aisha stepped onto the porch with a pitcher of lemonade, her eyes scanning the boys, the way a lighthouse scans the dark, calm constant. Graham leaned on the railing beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Just the soft hiss of the sprinkler and 3 small voices shouting, "Daddy, look!" He finally said it almost under his breath. "I came home ready to destroy the one person keeping us afloat." His voice cracked on the last word. Aisha didn't flinch. "You came home scared," she replied. "And scared people get loud. But you stopped. You looked. You listened." Graham nodded, swallowing hard. He could still see that brown envelope in his mind, the way betrayal had worn a familiar face. He'd learned the lesson the painful way love isn't always blood, and danger doesn't always look like a stranger. Sometimes it shows up with a sweet smile and a family name. He watched his sons tumble into a giggling pile, then turned his head slightly, as if speaking to someone beyond the fence. "If you're raising grandkids or starting over late in life, hear me," he said quietly. "Don't let fear make your choices for you. Protect what matters. And when someone shows up with real care, don't push them away. The boys ran back, dripping and breathless, and Graham opened his arms wide, choosing this time to hold on. The day the final order arrived in the mail, Graham didn't rip it open like a man chasing adrenaline. He carried it to the kitchen table the way you carry something fragile, something that can still hurt you if you drop it. Aisha was rinsing strawberries at the sink. The triplets were on the floor lining up toy cars in a crooked parade. Graham slid a finger under the flap, unfolded the pages, and read in silence. His shoulders, always tense, always braced, finally fell. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his body since the funeral. "It's denied," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Aisha turned slowly, water dripping from her hands. She didn't celebrate with fireworks. She just pressed her palm to the back of a chair, steadying herself the same way she'd steadied this whole house. "Good," she said. "Now we keep living." And that's what he did. He blocked Elaine's number. Every message went straight to the attorney unopened, untouched, like locking a door and refusing to test the handle again. Graham shifted his work hours, promoted people he trusted, and stopped treating home like a place he borrowed between crises. He became present in the quiet moments, wiping little faces after dinner, folding tiny shirts sitting on the porch, while the boys drew chalk suns on the driveway. Later that night, one of the triplets padded in, clutching a stuffed bear. "Daddy, I miss Mommy." Graham pulled him onto his lap, heart thumping slow and heavy. "Me too," he murmured, kissing the boy's forehead. "And we're going to miss her together, without falling apart." He looked up and found Aisha watching from the hallway, her eyes soft but strong. In that look, Graham understood the truth. He hadn't just won a case. He'd been handed a second chance, and this time he wasn't going to waste it. Weeks later, the memory that kept returning to Graham wasn't the courtroom or the paperwork. It was that first blistering afternoon when he'd skidded into the driveway engine, still running, ready to blow his life apart. He could still see it, like a scene burned into film, the backyard, shimmering in the heat, the slip and slide glistening, three little bodies, giggling so hard they could barely breathe, and Aisha soaked to the skin, bracing them with her hands, like she was holding the whole world in place. He'd been inches from firing her, inches from handing Elaine exactly what she wanted. Now, on a calmer day, he stood at the kitchen sink rinsing dishes while the triplets sat at the table drawing with fat crayons. One of them looked up and announced, matter-of-fact, "Auntie Aisha makes our hearts quiet." Graham froze, soap dripping off his fingers. He turned his head toward Aisha, who was folding laundry with that same steady rhythm. No spotlight, no applause, just presence. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. "We made it through the trap. We're still here." He wiped his hands on a towel, crouched beside the boys, and kissed the top of each head, 1, 2, 3, like counting blessings he almost lost. "You're safe," he told them, voice low. "I've got you. And hey, if you're watching this, and you're a grandparent, helping raise little ones, or you've had to start over later in life, listen close. Fear will try to steer the wheel. But love, the real kind, shows up quietly day after day, and it doesn't demand credit." That night, after the house went still, Graham whispered into the dark as if his wife could hear him. "I won't waste this chance. Not ever again." Later, when the house finally settled into that deep, honest quiet. No crying through the walls. No frantic footsteps. Graham walked the hallway like he used to, in the worst months. Only now, his shoulders weren't hunched like he was expecting bad news. The triplets slept in a loose sprawl of blankets and stuffed animals, their breathing steady, their cheeks still faintly pink from the day's sun. Graham stood in the doorway a long time, letting the sight of them sink in, letting it rewrite something inside him. Not the grief. Grief doesn't vanish. but the fear that he was failing them. He eased the door mostly closed and went downstairs where Aisha sat at the table, folding tiny t-shirts into neat stacks. The overhead light made a small circle in the kitchen like a stage. Graham set 2 mugs down warm tea, the way older folks swear can fix almost anything, and finally said what had been stuck in his chest since that slip-and-slide afternoon. "I thought my life was over," he admitted. "I thought I'd never be the dad they deserved." Aisha didn't rush to comfort him. She just looked at him steady as ever. "You're here," she said. "That's the part that matters. And here's where I'll talk to you for a second. Especially if you're 65 or older and you've had to raise kids again or support family through loss, second chances don't arrive with a bow on them. Sometimes they show up as a regular Tuesday in a quiet kitchen with someone good beside you and 3 little lives asleep down the hall." Graham lifted his mug, eyes wet but calm. "I won't waste it," he whispered, more vow than sentence, then turned toward the stairs, already choosing tomorrow. The next morning, Graham made one small choice that changed the tone of the whole day. He didn't rush out the door like he was escaping. He stayed, long enough to watch the triplets shuffle into the kitchen in mismatched pajamas, hair sticking up like little antennae blinking at the light. Aisha slid 3 plates onto the table. Simple breakfast cut fruit, everything within reach of tiny hands, and the boys climbed into their chairs without a single battle. Graham leaned against the counter coffee, warming his palms, and just watched the way older folks do when they've lived long enough to know peace is never guaranteed. One of the boys pointed at Aisha and said proudly, "She keeps us brave." Another added, "And you're brave too now, Daddy." Graham's eyes stung. He looked at Aisha, and his voice came out rough. "I almost listened to the wrong person." He didn't say Elaine's name. He didn't have to. Some doors once closed, stay closed. Aisha didn't give him a speech. She just nodded toward the table. "Then sit," she said. "Be with them." And Graham did. He pulled up a chair, let syrup drip on his fingers, let their chatter fill the room. Grief still lived in the corners of the house, sure, but it wasn't driving anymore. And hey, if you're hearing this and you've had to start over late in life, maybe as a grandparent stepping in or a widower learning a new routine, remember what saved Graham. He paused long enough to see the truth with his own eyes. Sometimes the miracle isn't loud. Sometimes it's 3 kids laughing in the sun, and the courage to protect that laughter. That afternoon, Graham found himself back where it all almost broke the backyard, the same stretch of grass that had once felt like a courtroom without a judge. The sun sat high, bright, and unforgiving, and the triplets begged for the slip and slide again like it was sacred. Aisha rolled it out with the same quiet confidence, checking the edges, testing the water, making sure every laugh stayed safe. Graham stood barefoot at the porch step suit and fear nowhere in sight. He watched his sons fling themselves into the sudsy runway, their arms out like little airplanes, and something in him finally unclenched. Not because the pain was gone, but because the purpose had returned. He walked down into the grass and crouched beside them. "Hey," he said, voice steady, eyes locked on 3 identical faces. "You're my whole heart, and I'm going to protect you every day. No shortcuts, no letting anyone confuse me again." The boys didn't fully understand the weight of that promise, but they felt it. They launched into his arms anyway, wet and giggling, piling onto him like he was home base. Aisha stayed a few feet back, letting the moment belong to them. But Graham looked up at her gratitude plain on his face. If she hadn't held the line, he would have burned down the very thing that was saving them. And if you're watching this, especially if you're older and you've had to rebuild a family after loss, remember this: a second chance doesn't arrive perfect. It arrives messy, loud, soaking wet, and worth fighting for. Graham pulled his boys close and silently swore again not to waste it. The story didn't end with a court order or a clean victory. It ended the way real life does, one ordinary day, stacked on top of the next, until the ordinary starts to feel like a gift. Weeks after the slip-and-slide afternoon, Graham stood at the top of the stairs and listened to the house breathe. No slammed doors, no frantic crying, just the soft hum of a ceiling fan and 3 small, steady rhythms of sleep. He stepped into the boys' room and paused in the doorway. Moonlight painted their faces silver. One had kicked off his blanket, one slept hugging a stuffed bear, and the third had his hand curled around the edge of the pillow like he was holding on to something precious. Graham swallowed hard, because he remembered the worst nights him pacing the hallway, helpless thinking he was failing them. Downstairs, Aisha was in the living room folding a basket of tiny clothes, like she was building order out of chaos, one shirt at a time. Graham sat across from her elbows on his knees, and his voice came out quieter than he meant it to. "I spent months thinking I had to be made of stone," he said. "But all they needed was for me to stay." Aisha looked up, her eyes warm but unflinching. "Then keep staying," she said. "That's how you win." Graham nodded, feeling the truth settle deep. Not revenge, not pride, just protection. He looked toward the hallway again, then back at Aisha. "Thank you," he whispered, not as politeness, but as a promise. And in that small, steady room, he understood what his second chance really was, choosing love on purpose every single day. By late summer, the calendar on Graham's fridge wasn't full of emergency notes anymore. It was full of life preschool reminders, little hand-drawn hearts. A dentist appointment circled in red, and a sticky note in Aisha's neat handwriting that simply read, "You're doing better. Keep going." Graham would catch himself staring at it some mornings, like he needed proof that the ground under him was real. One evening, the triplets sat cross-legged on the living room rug, building a crooked tower of blocks. Graham lowered himself onto the couch with a slow exhale, feeling every year of stress in his knees like an older man who's finally admitting he can't do everything the hard way anymore. Aisha set down a bowl of sliced peaches and took a seat nearby, close, but not intrusive, letting Graham be the center when it mattered. "Daddy?" one of the boys asked, voice small. "Are we safe forever now?" The question hit him like a soft punch. Graham leaned forward, elbows on his thighs, and looked at their faces. One by one, really looked. "We're safe because we take care of each other," he said. "Because we pay attention. Because we don't let fear make decisions for us." Aisha's eyes lifted to his, and he saw something there that wasn't pity. It was respect. The kind you earn after you've been knocked down and still choose to stand. And if you're watching this, especially if you're 65 or older, and you've had to rebuild a family after loss, remember this: the second chance isn't a one-time moment. It's the quiet daily choice to protect the laughter in your house, and to let good people help you keep it alive. That night, Graham stood at the kitchen window while the house slept, watching the porch light glow over the quiet yard. The same yard where fear had nearly convinced him to blow everything up. He could still hear the echo of his own thoughts from months ago. "I can't do this. I'm failing them." And yet, here he was, still standing, still their father. He walked down the hallway and stopped outside the boys' room. The door was cracked just enough to spill a ribbon of nightlight across the floor. Inside, 3 small bodies rose and fell with steady breaths. One had a blanket tangled around his legs. Another was clutching a stuffed bear like it was a lifeline. The third had his mouth slightly open, peaceful in a way that used to feel impossible. Graham leaned his forehead against the doorframe and let the relief hit him full force, so strong it almost hurt. Not the kind of relief that comes from winning a fight, but the kind that comes from realizing you didn't lose what mattered most. Downstairs, he found Aisha at the table, rinsing out cups and wiping crumbs like she always did. Quiet work, invisible to the world, life-saving to a family. Graham cleared his throat, voice low. "I keep thinking about that day," he admitted. How close I came. Aisha didn't look startled. She just nodded, as if she'd been holding that memory too. Close doesn't count, she said softly. What counts is you stopped. You chose your kids over your fear. Graham swallowed, eyes burning. I'm choosing them again tomorrow, he whispered. And the next day, for as long as I've got breath. Aisha finally met his gaze. Then you're already doing what they needed all along. The next weekend, Graham did something he hadn't done since his wife passed. He invited a few trusted neighbors over. Nothing fancy, just iced tea, paper plates, and a little backyard barbecue. The triplets ran in circles, shrieking with laughter, while Aisha moved quietly through the moment, refilling cups, wiping sticky hands, stepping in before a tumble turned into tears. Graham watched her, then watched his boys, and felt the truth land in his chest like a steady drumbeat. This is what rebuilding looks like. Not grand speeches, not perfect days, just showing up again and again until the house feels safe. As the sun dipped, one of the neighbors leaned in and whispered, "You seem lighter." Graham didn't brag. He just nodded toward the yard. I learned to stop letting fear drive, he said, and I learned to recognize real care when it's standing right in front of me. Here's the lesson that matters especially for those of you who've lived long enough to know. Life can change in a single phone call. Don't confuse noise with truth. The loudest voice in the room isn't always the one that loves you most. When you're grieving, tired, or overwhelmed, manipulation hits harder because you're already bleeding. So pause. Look with your own eyes. Choose the people who bring steadiness, not chaos, and protect the joy you've fought to rebuild. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been misled by someone you trusted and later realized who was truly there for you? Share your story in the comments. Someone else may need it today. And if you want more true-to-life stories that hit the heart, subscribe to the channel and stay with us.